But let's start with the newest and the one that will actually lead us into the Ghislaine Maxwell trial update. Assange. So the High Court, or the higher court in England, it's not the highest court because there's still an appeal that could be had. 2-1, from what I understand, overruled the original decision, which was not to extradite Julian Assange to the US to face the charges of espionage, whatever. I forget exactly what he was charged for. And the rationale that the initial judgment gave was that given his mental state, his fragility, he could not be subjected to the punishment or the extradition process. But then they nonetheless kept him locked up, basically in maximum security anyhow in England. I mean, I guess who appealed? The Crown or the Queen appealed, and they succeeded 2-1 on this appeal. I mean, that's the bottom line of this.
Yes, I mean, it required the U.S. government to request the appeal for the appeal to take place, but they appealed because the sole grounds the trial court gave was that the conditions of his potential punishment in the United States were too severe for his current mental health condition. In particular, the risk of supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, and a range of other potential risks that he faced. And they appealed, and the U.S. government claimed they would never send him to supermax, and they made a bunch of other promises that are completely legally inconsequential and not binding, that the U.S. government has a long and notorious history that this high court completely ignored, violating their promises, particularly in the extradition context. They've made these kind of promises all the time, and unless it's considered a limit on the jurisdiction of the U.S. court, they completely ignore that. I mean, the U.S. has prosecuted people who have been kidnapped from foreign countries repeatedly. So, I mean, it's slap in the face to extradition law on its face. And so the idea that the U.S. government's just going to make these promises and somehow that means it's now okay when they're totally unenforceable promises really makes a joke out of the High Court of Britain. But, you know, the British legal authorities and political authorities have been good little puppets of the United States for a while. I mean, we beat them in the revolution, and now they act like they've been slapped down so much they have to follow us around. Whatever we tell them to do, they say yes, sir, as quickly as they can. They're a sad, pitiful shadow of an empire that can't even honor their own constitutional limits or their own legal precepts whenever the U.S. comes telling them to do what they tell them to do. They're a good little doggy. Boris is a good little doggy, and the Brits are good little doggies, and those little justices are good little doggies. And it's a sad, disgraceful state of affairs in the British High Court. Hopefully, the British Supreme Court re-examines all the issues and takes the case, but that's no guarantee because the Brits do not have a good history of standing up to the United States when the United States is wrong.
But Robert, I mean, the one thing that I find it's ironic in the most cynical sense is that they're extraditing Julian Assange based on warranties and representations that the U.S. gave in their pleadings or in their representations to court, that they will be good to Julian, that if he's convicted, he can serve in Australia, that, you know, his fragility, his mental state is either not bad enough or they'll accommodate. This is the same government that was secretly plotting to assassinate him. I mean, making these warranties and representations to the court. I don't want to get blackpilled. How does anyone not laugh at this and say it's an absolute travesty of representations coming from the entity that was literally plotting to unlawfully assassinate him?
It's a joke. I mean, what the British High Court did, taking that at face value, is a joke. It would have been one thing if they would have said that even if he was subject to the worst possible conditions, it's not grounds to deny extradition. That I would have disagreed with that legally, but that would have been at least a factually credible argument rather than the factually incredulous argument that they made. I mean, to pretend that the U.S. government promises mean anything at all in this context, given their long and notorious history around the world for over a century of ignoring extradition law and ignoring their promises in diplomatic context. I mean, just ask the Russians how the U.S. kept its word on, don't worry, we won't expand NATO if you dissolve the Soviet Union. We have a current, crisis in Ukraine over that broken promise. So it's just ludicrous. But it shows that, the Brits have no independence. When the U.S. deep state comes asking them to hop, they only ask how high. And it's sad. And who should be embarrassed is the integrity and the independence and the authority of the British courts themselves, because they've made a mockery of themselves to the whole world by the way they've handled this case. Now the appeal to the Supreme Court will be much more robust than the issues they dealt with here.
And you know what? I don't know who doesn't know of the Julian Assange, but maybe if we can do a 5-minute overall summary of everything, because I think most people don't appreciate the trauma that the individual has gone through, whether you like him or not. But bottom line, so Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, once upon a time released a bunch of classified information, which revealed nothing shy of, do I have to say alleged American war crimes in, I think it was Iraq?
No, yeah, it was proven war crimes.
Targeting journalists for extrajudicial termination, a bunch of other stuff. Released this information, by all accounts had no active role in misappropriating that information. It was transmitted to him through someone who misappropriated it, but there's a long-standing case law on the legality of that in the U.S. Why did he end up in the Ecuadorian embassy again? While they were pursuing these charges, some interesting charges appeared from Sweden accusing him of sexual improprieties, something called stealthing, which is allegedly removing or causing a condom to break during the act of intercourse, which is itself a form of sexual impropriety, to use proper terminology for YouTube, in Sweden. They wanted to extradite him to Sweden. His fear was that he was going to get extradited to Sweden, then extradited to the US. So he holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for a day that turned into 7 years to avoid extradition to Sweden. The investigation into him in Sweden was ultimately dropped because they said time had lapsed where they could no longer usefully prosecute him. Explain to the world who doesn't necessarily understand why he got booted from the Ecuadorian embassy and what was going on at that time that might explain that political decision.
So, I mean, Julian Assange is the biggest publisher of whistleblower information in world history. Has exposed secrets, the criminal secrets of governments around the globe, including, in particular, but not limited to, the United States. He was targeted for that reason, first with heavily politicized and highly questionable criminal accusations in Sweden that ultimately, as you note, didn't result in any prosecution. They had pretext for it, but their pretext didn't really make sense. The reality is the facts didn't support their claim, is my belief. And he sought amnesty from the Ecuadorian government, received it from the Ecuadorian government, but the British refused to allow him to leave the embassy. And so he was stuck physically in a small room for about 7 years, the worst form of home imprisonment you could have. Then the Ecuadorian government, under Vice President Pence, helped coordinate with a range of people, including some people that are still popular in Trump world that don't deserve to be in the Trump administration, to buy off and bribe the Ecuadorian government into basically allowing the British and the Americans to go in and kidnap Julian Assange. In the interim, they had multiple plans to try to kill him and murder him, including Hillary Clinton famously asking, "Can't we just drone bomb him?" Willingness to drone a foreign government embassy just to make her point.
Actually, and if you could open a slight parentheses there for people who don't appreciate why embassies are impenetrable on foreign soil. And just one side parentheses, he was locked in a room, basically a hotel room, maybe a little bigger, for years. At one point, I remember there was a fundraiser or a push to get him a treadmill, so at the very least he could exercise while he was in there. But explain why embassies are inviolable property in foreign countries.
It's basically part of treaty law. And so a government says, if you recognize our embassy's right to be immune from domestic prosecution, we will reciprocate, and your embassy will be immune from criminal prosecution in most instances on our turf. And the other reason is this: it's fundamentally the foreign government's property, is also how it's perceived. So it's not, even though it's located within the United Kingdom, that property is considered the property or territory of the foreign government. When Ecuador had a change in presidents, then the Vice President Pence came in and bribed him to help them kidnap Assange out of the embassy, and they went along with it and allowed it to happen. By itself, a patent violation of basic international norms, and disturbing. I mean, if we grant amnesty to someone, are we going to feel comfortable with some foreign government coming in and kidnapping them back to that government? I mean, we would be enraged, and yet we participated and organized this ourselves. So then he was jailed in Belmarsh Prison, one of the worst prisons in the world already in the United Kingdom. Subject to all kinds of restrictions and harsh punitive restrictions. His mental health has deteriorated while he has been in there, and his physical health has deteriorated. He apparently recently had a stroke. Belmarsh Prison, like most prisons, is not well suited to provide competent or capable medical care, especially for someone with fragile mental health, as Assange has got to that place. He was practically, they played mental tricks and mentally tortured him the last year or so. He was in the Ecuadorian embassy. So he's been subject to this now for years. Then the lower court, now the robust challenge is brought, was that an extradition to the United States would violate various British law. It was a politically motivated prosecution. It was for punishment of free press. It endangered the means of free press, and that was the core of the challenge. It was secondary arguments was his mental health. The court ignored the other arguments, went with mental health. The issues of free press and politically motivated prosecutions was not dealt with by the High Court because it was not part of the appeal. It will, however, be part of the appeal to the British Supreme Court, to the highest court in Britain. I forget whether it may be called something else, but the highest court in Britain, which can decline to review the extradition, but they really shouldn't, given the high-profile nature of this case. And they will have to address all of those issues, not just the issues of his mental health in that appeal.
And I cover this because it's funny. This is another one of the stories that was the introduction of my red pill trajectory. But at one point, the issue about fighting his extradition was that typically the UK would not extradite someone to a country that potentially had the death penalty because that would be cruel and unusual punishment, and therefore a barring for extradition. And what he's being charged with could, in theory, although highly unlikely, carry the death penalty, Robert, or am I wrong on that?
They've said they won't seek the death penalty, and that may be binding on them, that particular promise. But the other ones would not be binding, such as how he gets treated, whether he gets sent to Australia to serve his sentence, whether or not he goes to Florence Supermax. All of those things, the U.S. government has proven utterly untrustworthy and unreliable on that, and the court just ignored that. I think the more robust issues are, this clearly is this is a targeted prosecution that even the Obama administration declined, because the Obama administration went after more whistleblowers than any administration. In fact, all of the prior administrations combined. And yet even the Obama administration recognized that this would be an impermissible prosecution under First Amendment standards, under the New York Times Pentagon Papers case. Because again, those were stolen papers by someone who did not have authority to release them, who released them. So, when people tell me there's a difference between the Ellsberg case and the Assange case, no, there isn't. And not of any honest review of the facts. People claim Assange got people killed. They've produced zero proof of that. Big fat zero. If you want to keep listening to lies of deep state operators, you're the sucker, not anyone else.
Well, they said, to make it even broader, it went at one point, I think, from he got people killed to he put people at risk, and then there was still no concrete evidence that he put soldiers at risk in any event. But Robert,
he put some criminals at risk. That's who he put at risk. He put criminal murderers at risk. Criminal murderers. That's who these people were. And some people are so reflexively defensive of the military, even with its woke incarnation, even with its current imposition of vaccines on its own soldiers, still so reflexively defensive of the magic of the uniform and some medals, that they think disclosing any of their secrets is a bad thing. No, disclosing their crimes is a good thing. It's what we should be entitled to as a citizenry.
I'm not old enough to know the Pentagon Papers, but if that's the argument for Assange, what did the Pentagon Papers reveal? And the publication of the Pentagon Papers was permitted by the Supreme Court. What did that have that was not equally as offensive, if this is the criteria?
Yeah, it's identical. So, basically they're trying to make new dangerous law because they don't want anyone to be like Julian Assange in the future. Because Julian Assange's whole thing is what keeps up corrupt governments are secrets. So it's sort of like, the movie, Sneakers, no more secrets. That was his mantra. No more secrets. Uncloak the secrets, and you take down the corruption of governments, because they need secrets to thrive and commit crimes. And that's why he was the greatest threat to that system of corrupt governance, probably in the history of the modern world. and that's why they want to make an example out of it. So nobody wants to be another Julian Assange, and that's what it's all about. I mean, that's why they went after Daniel Ellsberg too. But the corruption of the case got publicly exposed, and so Ellsberg was able to ultimately walk, but not without the Nixon administration trying it. And a lot of this is, some of Trump's best advocates put together a memorandum for him to pardon Assange. And after January 6th, he got his cojones clipped, and he acted like a wuss throughout the last 3 weeks of his administration, rather pitifully. And the effect of it is that Julian Assange is put in this position of danger. So, a president who some people believe partially got elected because Julian Assange exposed the secrets of Hillary Clinton.
And I guess that's a preemptive answer to the question. Trump should have pardoned him. Your belief, this is an opinion, is that after Jan 6, it would have been publicly impalatable, or it would be unfathomable to have pardoned Assange after January 6th. I mean, is that how maybe Jan 6 was weaponized in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it was what Mitch McConnell and other people told him. Told him that he would get convicted in the Senate if he pardoned Assange, or if he declassified a bunch of record requests, not only related to Russiagate, but also John F. Kennedy's assassination and other items. And so he folded. I mean, he almost didn't pardon Steve Bannon. He at the last minute, he decided to go ahead with that. But the only two people, with a bunch of people pushed for Bannon's pardon, along with other people connected to Bannon's case. And other people, like certain people connected to CPAC were taking money from people to try to get other people pardoned. I mean, and some of those people got commutations and things like that. I mean, it just, the way he handled the pardon system was disgraceful, just disgraceful. Showed lack of courage, a lot of cowardice, and him capitulating to some big money donor crowds. And we're now seeing the consequences of that. And it's to his shame that Julian Assange is even in this position.
White lightning, and by the way, I think we're just going to move into Bannon after this because it's a perfect segue. But a lot of good that that pardon for Bannon has done for Bannon, but he should not have accepted it, is my humble opinion. Wouldn't it have been better for Assange just to accept extradition? It's hard to imagine a left-leaning DC jury convicting a whistleblower.
Well, he would be tried in Northern Virginia, number one. Number two, the professional class left hates Julian Assange. They blame Julian Assange for the election of Donald Trump. So they hate him as much as anybody, probably more than anybody. And so that's where that is. He has almost no. Just look at the history of national security trials. I don't know if anybody's been acquitted in a while. It's very, very difficult to get acquitted in those cases. Those cases are a joke. They're quasi-secret trials in violation of the Constitution, in my view. And so the idea that he can get a fair trial or anything vaguely resembling it is just not accurate. And the DC crowd hates him. So the left doesn't support Barack Obama prosecuted more whistleblowers than all of his predecessors combined. That's what the DC left thinks of whistleblowers. They don't like whistleblowers at all. So they only like whistleblowers who are on their political side. That's it.
I don't know if I have any more questions for Assange. I mean, I do. So they're going to appeal the process, or they're going to appeal the process for the appeal. It's not going to be overnight. So there's no interim extradition pending the appeal. So it'll be another however many months. Because Robert, when was the last time we talked about this?
It could easily be another year before there's any Supreme Court adjudication. And in the meantime, whether he's still alive by that is an open question.
Because in the meantime, he's still in max security with the worst of the worst in England. He's, it's the scene from Braveheart where at the end of the movie, like Braveheart or William Wallace is not coming back once they open his stomach. And we're at that stage in Assange's life regardless. He's the shell of the man that he was. It's not even clear he could ever be rehabilitated to anything of what psychologically, spiritually, physically he was. And now he's become a figurehead, so to speak, of what he represents, which is a free press and the embodiment of someone who's been persecuted, prosecuted, and tortured for the last decade because of what he did. And even if you free him now, that's going to serve as one hell of a deterrent to anyone else who would ever think of doing anything along the lines of what he's doing. Although James O'Keefe is still, he's pushing the envelope in terms of what he's reporting on. But so he'll be in jail for another year while they appeal this to the highest court. If they hear it or don't hear it, however they adjudicate, even if he's alive and even if he wins, he loses, the system wins, and then maybe a principle is set that is worth what it's worth at this point in time.
It's a very perilous precedent for any kind of free press, for any kind of not only that, just open, transparent government, exposing government crimes, for whistleblowers in general. That the most famous whistleblower, the most successful publisher of whistleblowers in world history, is basically tortured into death. Effectively, is the path that the United States government has currently put him on, and it's sad and disgraceful, and it will go down as one of the great failures of the Trump administration, especially if that ends up being the end destination.
Punishing Assange probably won't deter the next Assange, like punishing Ross Ulbricht's Silk Road founder hasn't deterred those sight on the dark net. I don't know enough about Ross Ulbricht, although I know a bit of the story. And you're right. I don't think it'll deter future Assanges, because I think on the one hand, people will never reasonably expect to be treated like Assange, and there's going to be too many. And like it's like Anonymous or the movie V for Vendetta. The more there are, they can't do this to everybody. They're trying with Jan 6. We're probably going to get there at some point tonight, but they'll try. But the more there are, the less likely it is that they can do this to that many people, because there will be people out there speaking about it